Good evening, everybody. Buenas noches a todos. We have the pleasure to have again with us Kevin Battle. Kevin is I would like to call you our right hand when it comes to all immigration issues. These days, we handle through Kevin pretty much most of the immigration that we're actually working on. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Um, Kevin is a seasoned immigration attorney, works for probably one of the nicest companies there are called Miller Johnson. And I'll skip the rest of the background, Kevin, because I think everybody eventually will get to know you one way or another.
Absolutely.
Buenas noches a todos. Tengo el placer de tener con nosotros a Kevin Battle. Kevin es ah, uno de nuestros abogados, el abogado con el que trabajamos más en la parte general de migración, pertenece a una estupenda compañía que se llama Miller Johnson, con la que manejamos buena parte de los asuntos migratorios a los Estados Unidos. Tenemos esta noche nuevamente el placer de tener a Kevin. Vamos a discutir muchísimos temas relacionados con la parte de migración. So, Kevin, I know we have a lot of topics, but I think the way we probably should start is just with no, the general recount of a little bit of how the process works, and then you and I will go into a bit of a roundtable on several topics with respect to that. So I will be, passing some of the slides. You'll tell me how fast, and remember to take a little break every few sentences or give me a chance or give us a chance to translate.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me for a second.
Thank you again for having me again. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna sort of start out by just telling everybody, I know that you probably are hearing a lot of things on the news with respect to immigration changes and enforcement, but the good news is the EB-3 process for registered nurses has not changed at all. So if you've attended before, if you are familiar with the process, nothing about the process itself has changed.
Okay. Ah, Kevin los saluda a todos ustedes. Les dice que no importa que tanta información has oído en las noticias recientemente, lo más importante que él quiere recalcarles es que nada con respecto al proceso de obtener la residencia permanente a través del EB3 ha cambiado para absolutamente nada. Todo continúa igual.
So there are generally three important steps to the process. The first step is the employer must obtain a prevailing wage determination from the Department of Labor. Um, and what that document is, it's a document that says how much you must be paid for the registered nurse job in the particular location where you will be working. So it ensures that you're going to get, a fair wage, the same as the U.S. workers in the same occupation in the same metropolitan statistical area.
El Kevin nos recuerda que bajo el proceso EB3, el primer paso que los hospitales tienen que hacer es obviamente acercarse al Ministerio de Trabajo y obtener una determinación de los salarios prevalentes que hay en la región donde ellos están. Ellos están legalmente obligados a darle a los enfermeros que estamos trayendo de manera internacional un salario equivalente, un salario equitativo, comparable al mismo que se le hace a los enfermeros de esa misma localización, de esa misma región.
And it takes roughly about 6 to 7 months to get that prevailing wage. But what we try to do is we try to keep one of those documents active so that we can avoid any unnecessary delays, and try to save you some time.
Normalmente obtener ese tipo de documentos toma unos 6 a 8 meses, pero los hospitales tratan de mantener estos documentos solicitados al día de manera que no haya necesidad de someter a los enfermeros a una demora adicional.
The second step is that in the Schedule A EB3 process is preparation of the labor certification document. It's pre-certified for Schedule A nurses, which means that they don't have to go and advertise for the job. You get to skip that step as a nurse, and you file this document together with the I-140. So that's another step that as a registered nurse that you get to save a little bit of time.
Ok. El siguiente paso en el proceso de contratación es que los hospitales tienen que hacer una certificación de que no hay trabajadores americanos calificados para obviamente obtener esos mismos empleos. La buena noticia con respecto a los enfermeros profesionales es que ellos son parte de una precertificación que ya existe con el departamento, donde ya está demostrado que no hay suficientes enfermeros nativos americanos y por lo tanto esta documentación se puede rápidamente agregar a la solicitud del proceso migratorio.
Oh, then we get to filing of the I-140. And so you take that prevailing wage determination along with that certified labor certification document, and you file that I-130 with the USCIS. And at that point, you secure, as soon as that's received, you secure your priority date, which I know that a lot of you are probably familiar with, but that's the important date that really starts the clock for us, for our wait.
El siguiente paso, que es un paso súper importante, es cuando se hace la petición de la residencia un inmigrante, para una persona, a través del proceso de empleador, con el llenado de esta documentación. Lo bueno es que obviamente una vez que estos documentos entran al proceso, esto inmediatamente asegura la fecha, ¿ok? En la cual la persona hizo su aplicación o el hospital hizo la aplicación a favor de esa persona y esa es la fecha desde la cual el proceso se empieza a regir. Kevin les comenta que él sabe que muchos de ustedes están bastante familiarizados con esa fecha. Este es el momento en el cual se establece esa fecha, cuando se hace esta aplicación para el proceso I-140.
If your priority date happens to be current at the time that you're filing the I-140 and you're in the United States, you'll file a I-485 application for adjustment of status. If you are outside of the United States, you'll consulate process when your priority date becomes current. So those are important things to know, the different processes. So if you're going to be inside the United States in a status, you'll file an adjustment of status. You're going to be outside of the United States, you're going to consulate process.
La otra parte importante es si la persona se encuentra en los Estados Unidos bajo un estatus legal en este país o si se encuentra por fuera de los Estados Unidos. Si esa persona se encuentra en los Estados Unidos, se requiere hacer una aplicación que se llama la I-485 para el ajuste del estatus de la persona. De lo contrario, las personas por fuera de los Estados Unidos entran o van a través del proceso consular.
Skipped ahead a little bit, but one of the things you'll want to be familiar with is after the I-140 is approved from the USCIS, they're going to send your case to the National Visa Center. The National Visa Center is going to email us. They're going to collect the fees. They're going to send us a list of documents that we need, birth certificates, police clearances, medical exams, and they'll gather all of that information for you in preparation for your interview.
Una vez que el proceso está aprobado y hay una visa disponible para ustedes, se entra se hace la solicitud al centro de visas para que la persona le puedan dar efectivamente la visa. En ese momento obviamente hay que hacer unos pagos, hay que hacer una documentación adicional que incluye los certificados judiciales, los exámenes médicos, etcétera, que se requieren todo para poder ir al proceso consular de la persona.
And again, just two separate processes for the final step. Consulate processing for nurses outside the United States, adjustment of status is for nurses that are already inside the United States.
Ok. Y finalmente con la visa, una vez dada la persona, las personas por fuera del país se dirigen en ese momento al proceso consular a través del consulado. Las personas dentro de los Estados Unidos van a través del proceso de ajuste de estatus para que les den su residencia permanente. So that that is basically the general process to obtaining the most common visa for everybody. Esto es básicamente el método más común por el cual la gran mayoría de ustedes obtiene su visa a través del proceso. Um, Kevin, you may want to mention that there are a few considerations for nurses that they need to know that are attached to the processing. One is obviously the famous visa screen. Let's talk a little bit about that. The issue of having a licensing, and obviously we can talk a little bit about the timetable of the process.
Sure. So, nurses are going to need a visa screen at the time that they are going to interview to enter the United States if they're abroad, or they'll need that visa screen if they're already here at the time that they're going to file that 485. And a visa screen, in order to obtain one, you have to pass, NCLEX RN and that English proficiency test. You can obtain that through two separate companies. You can choose either Joseph Silney and Associates, or I was CGFNS, but now I know that they've sold, so it's someone
Through
else.
merit,
Yeah,
through merit.
through Merit. Yeah, okay, that's what it is. I couldn't remember the new name.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, believe it or not, there is a third company who has started to get into the process too.
Oh,
They're a bit new, but basically the two that you mentioned are basically. um, Kevin les comenta que obviamente para poder hacer todo el proceso o concluir el proceso se requiere que la persona tenga o haya obtenido su certificado Visa Screen. Este certificado únicamente se lo dan a aquellas personas que han pasado los dos exámenes de requerimiento. Para obtenerla se requiere que la persona se haya registrado como enfermero y haya aprobado la prueba del NCLEX, la prueba de registro como enfermero profesional, el NCLEX RN, y en adición a eso, para poder no, entrar al proceso consular, obviamente tienen que haber aprobado, demostrar que ellos tienen un nivel de intermedio B2 de inglés. Estos dos requerimientos son los que se requieren para poder obtener el visa screen, que es el documento fundamental para poder obtener la visa.
And just like all of you who are, nurses in your home countries, you need to obtain a license to practice in a particular state. So wherever that hospital is that you're going to be employed at, you're going to need to obtain a license for that state. And I know oftentimes that's something that, Nash Group can help you through that process, but that's one of the requirements that you'll have to do once you get here.
El otro punto importante es, obviamente, para poder trabajar en el estado donde está el hospital que te ha hecho la oferta y te está trayendo, finalmente necesitas endorsar o obtener la licencia en particular desde de ese estado. Esto es obviamente un proceso que nosotros les colaboramos, pero este proceso es requerido para que la persona oficialmente pueda trabajar en el estado. Las licencias de enfermería son estado específico, así que es importante, no importa en qué estado se haya obtenido la licencia original, la licencia hay que endorsarla al estado en el que la persona va a trabajar.
And probably the most important question that people always want to know is how long is all of this going to take? Um, the answer to that is it depends. Um, we'll talk a little bit about the visa bulletin and what that looks like, but um, every so often it changes due to backlogs in the system, but you should expect, it right now to take a few years from start to finish for you to arrive in the United States with your EB3 green card. There are some certainly ways to speed up the process along the way. The I-140 can be what they call premium process, which results in a 15-day review instead of a 6 to 8 month review. But the whole process does take, at least currently, it's taking a few years to complete.
Ok. La pregunta que obviamente todo el mundo tiene está pendiente de saber, bueno, ¿y cuánto se está demorando todo este proceso? Obviamente el proceso varía dependiendo en diferentes ocasiones, pero en este momento el proceso está demorándose un par de años, desde comienzo hasta el final. Obviamente, los hospitales tienen la posibilidad de acelerar algunas partes del proceso, no tener que esperar a la aprobación inicial de la visa. Se puede hacer para que en 2 semanas quede aprobada, pero lo que más se está demorando, y en este momento vamos a hablar de eso en un poquito más detalle, es que la visa les sea otorgada a la persona, no es que se la aprueben, sino que se la otorguen.
Probably the second most important question and most frequent question I get is about family. So you are being sponsored by a hospital to come and be a nurse. Can you bring your family members with you? The answer to that is generally yes. So if you are married and you have a spouse, that spouse is going to be entitled to a green card as well. So they will get a visa as well that will allow them to work and stay in the United States along with you. And if you have children who are unmarried and under the age of 21, you'll be able to bring those children along with you. They will also get a green card as well. So your derivative spouse and derivative children who are unmarried under 21 will also get green cards as well. They'll get those visas.
La otra pregunta importante que hacen con frecuencia es si yo puedo traer a la familia, y la respuesta es sí, se puede traer al núcleo familiar. A través de este proceso tú puedes traer contigo obviamente a tu núcleo familiar. Eh, para clarificar como núcleo familiar es importante que sepan que hay algunos requerimientos que hay que cumplir. Requerimiento número uno, tiene que haber un certificado matrimonial, tienen que estar formalmente casados, eh, cónyuges, casados, obviamente siempre les digo que no importa el sexo del cónyuge, y los hijos menores de 21 años. Kevin le gusta agregar el comentario que sean solteros, obviamente. Hijos menores de 21 años, la gran mayoría son solteros, pero como para tener esa cláusula en cuenta también. Los dos se consideran derivados como beneficiarios del proceso y por lo tanto pueden obtener la misma residencia permanente, el mismo green card para los Estados Unidos. Okay, allow me for a second. I'll move to the next slide, Kevin.
All right. So, some of the important family considerations, I think maybe first, your spouse is going to be eligible for the ability to work in the United States. So, they will be able to, if you're filing a adjustment of status and they're in the United States, they're going to be eligible for an EAD card while waiting for the green card. And when they actually, if they're council processing and they actually arrive in the United States, they're going to be able to work through their green card and they can work for any employer. So they're not limited to a particular area or a particular employer.
Ok. Algunas consideraciones adicionales con respecto a la familia. Obviamente, la aplicación se puede hacer simultánea o si la persona decide que quiere no hacer la aplicación después para la familia, lo puede hacer también después. Las personas que están por fuera de los Estados Unidos, cuando llegan, la familia, cuando se hizo la aplicación, todos llegan con la misma residencia permanente, con la misma green card, que no tiene ninguna limitación. El cónyuge tiene derecho a trabajar, tiene las prerrogativas de poder trabajar en donde absolutamente esa persona quiera, no hay ninguna restricción de poder vivir y trabajar en los Estados Unidos. Si si el cónyuge se encuentra aquí en los Estados Unidos durante la aplicación, el proceso permite solicitar, mientras que se aprueba la visa, el permiso de trabajo. Se puede solicitar mientras que se está esperando a que se otorgue la visa y pueden trabajar también sin ninguna limitación. Eso.
Families can file together at the same time. So you can include your family members in your initial application, or you have the option to have your family file separately and join you later. And the same thing with if you all interviewed the same time at the consulate, you don't necessarily all have to enter at the exact same time. So there's some flexibility if, for example, you had a child in school and you were going to come and your spouse and child were going to wait until the school year was done. There's some flexibility in that.
Kevin le recuerda además que hay cierto, cuando se hacen las aplicaciones de familia hay alguna flexibilidad. Si hay algún motivo por el cual la familia quiere llegar un poco más tarde, están terminando el año escolar o algo por el estilo y quieren llegar meses después de que el enfermero haya llegado, hay bastante flexibilidad donde el enfermero se presenta adelante y la familia se presenta al proceso unos meses después. Kevin, could you mention that as there is a small detail about that because once you kind of get your visa stamp on your passport, the clock is ticking, correct?
Correct. Usually it's 6 months. They'll give you 6 months to enter. Sometimes you can get an extension, but sort of the rule of thumb is you need to enter within 6 months.
Okay. Uno de los motivos por los cuales ustedes se preguntarán por qué algunas familias deciden no hacerlo simultáneamente es porque en principio una vez que entran al proceso consular y les dan las visas, el reloj está corriendo. Tienen 6 meses para llegar físicamente a los Estados Unidos. Hay algunas excepciones donde se puede pedir una extensión, pero en general la regla es que una vez que obtienes tu visa estampada en el pasaporte, tienes 6 meses para llegar formalmente. Todos tienen 6 meses para básicamente llegar a los Estados Unidos y activar sus visas.
And an important consideration for those of you who may have children that are close to 21, there's a concept called aging out. So the child, must be under 21 at the time that a visa becomes available to them. Um, if you file the process and you're waiting for your priority date to come, and they turn 21, they may age out of the process and be ineligible. Um, there is, there's it's a little bit complicated concept, the Child Status Protection Act. So there are potential options. If you're in a situation like that, you should let the attorney know that you have a child who is close to 21, or I would even go as far as say if you have a child that's 19 or older, you should let the attorney know so that they are using the best strategy to preserve as much time as possible for your child.
Ok. Es importante que ustedes sepan con respecto a la edad de aquellos hijos que están cercanos a la edad de 21 años, que en la fecha en que se hizo la aplicación original no es la fecha contra la cual se mide la edad de la persona, sino la fecha en la que las visas están disponibles. Las visas pueden estar aprobadas, pero no están disponibles. Es cuando la visa está disponible que en ese momento en adelante la persona, el hijo o la hija tiene que tener menos de 21 años. Kevin le recuerda que aquellos que tengan hijos, diga usted, mayores de unos 19 años, es importante que le avisen al abogado de antemano, porque hay algunas estrategias que se pueden utilizar para que durante los 2 años de espera, más o menos, que se están dando las visas, el hijo o la hija no quede por fuera del proceso, no se vuelva un adulto y no pueda participar del proceso. Esto es súper importante discutirlo de antemano con el abogado. Okay, let me move to the next one. So can you make sure that you clarify exactly what the priority date is, Kevin?
Yeah. So a priority date is your place, it's your spot in line. So because there is a visa backlog, they've created a concept where you get a place in line. And so the date in which your petition is filed with the USCIS, the date that they receive it, that is your priority date. That's your place in line.
Okay. So, la pregunta común que mucha gente hace es, ¿qué es eso de la fecha de prioridad? La fecha de prioridad entiendan que es como su puesto en la línea de la espera para obtener la visa. En el momento que se hace la aplicación para la obtención, el día que se meten los papeles para solicitar que haya una aprobación de visa. Esa es la fecha con la cual ustedes entran a la fila. En ese momento, esa es la fecha de prioridad y contra esa fecha es que es que hay las esperas o las demoras con respecto. Esa es la fecha que determinan cuáles fechas ya están disponibles de visas y dependiendo de esa fecha se hace en adelante. And Kevin, would just clarify for people that this priority date is not the day for the aging out of the children. It's not the same date.
Correct.
Mhm.
The priority date is not the age out date. The priority date is simply the date at which a green card is available to the principal applicant. So um, you get your spot in line, and we're tracking. Okay, when your date becomes current, you a green card is now available to you. The age out date is going to be um, when your child turns 21, was there a visa that was available to them at that time? So they're two separate dates. If you, like I said, if you have a child who is around 19 or older, there are some strategies that we can employ to get you some extra time back to freeze their age, even though they continue to get older. But that's something that we would, have it would be individual case by case basis that we'd want to look at.
Yo le pedía a Kevin que por favor les clarificaba que la fecha de prioridad no es la fecha por la cual se determina si un hijo o una hija es mayor o menor de 21 años. Es la fecha que determina si el hijo o la hija no, tiene la oportunidad, es la fecha cuando la visa está disponible, no cuando la visa fue aprobada. Por lo tanto, es súper, súper importante porque hay estrategias para personas que están cerca de esas fechas que puedan trabajar con el abogado, pero estas cosas son dependientes una por una de cada caso, que las discutan de antemano con el abogado para tratar de minimizar las circunstancias donde un hijo o una hija se vuelve no elegible a través de este proceso para obtener una visa. Um, could we make a quick sidebar on this issue and then we'll focus on other things that I think are more important? Um, what if the child, can a person still eventually solicit a child over the age of 21?
Yes, they can. It's a different process. So um, you can file particularly when you get to be, the best thing is when you get to be a U.S. citizen filing for a child, you can file through a different process to bring that child who's over 21. It just takes longer.
Mhm.
So they're not getting the benefit of um, your EB3 filing. You are then making an application on behalf of your child.
As a
So
family application.
a
But,
family application.
but do they have to wait until they become a US citizen or can they make the application as a US resident?
You can make it as a resident, but you fall into a different preference category. So much like um, the employment-based process where we have EB1, EB2, EB3, and preference
Mhm.
categories, they have the same thing for family-based preference categories. And the spouse or child, minor child of a US citizen is the fastest. And then it goes down from there as to the preference category. So it takes longer time.
Before I translate, what's the difference in time between, no, because you have an additional 5 years to wait to become a citizen. So what's more or less the difference in time between a resident and a citizen?
Um,
Yes, in general.
well, I've got the visa bulletin open, so
Okay.
um, let me
Let,
just
let me translate what you look it up.
sure.
So, yo le pedía a Kevin que por favor les explique antes de que entremos a otros temas que son más interesantes, que tener un hijo o una hija mayor de 21 años significa cuando ustedes ya están en los Estados Unidos, sí los pueden solicitar, pero es a través de un proceso que no es por el empleador, es un proceso de familia. Dependiendo si ustedes son residentes o si ya se volvieron ciudadanos americanos, los tiempos son diferentes. Cuando una persona es un residente permanente, tiene que haber vivido en los Estados Unidos 5 años para volverse ciudadano. En principio, la persona puede aplicar para un familiar siendo residente permanente, pero hay ventajas cuando uno ya es ciudadano porque los tiempos son más cortos para los ciudadanos que para los residentes. Le estoy preguntando a Kevin que nos diga cuál es la diferencia entre aplicar para un hijo como residente permanente versus como ciudadano americano. So,
So it is roughly a little bit over 9 years
for a
for,
resident.
yes, for if you are a permanent resident with a unmarried son or daughter, 21 years or older. The priority date right now is October 15th, 2016. So it's
So it's about 9 years back. And as a citizen,
so unmarried son of, let's see, hold on.
Kevin nos dice que el tiempo de espera, si ustedes llegan a los Estados Unidos el día de hoy, diga usted al día siguiente llegar a los Estados Unidos, usted aplica para un hijo mayor o una hija mayor de 21 años. En este momento, la prioridad, el tiempo de mora para esas visas está más o menos unos 9 años. Y nos va a decir cuál es la demora que hay en este momento para si uno ya es ciudadano.
So right now, the time actually for US citizens, if you're over 21, is going to be this. It looks like it's very close to being the same. That's not usually the case. Um, if you are going to be, let's see, three.
So even if the time is the same, my question is, as a strategy, is better to apply as a resident and eventually, if you become citizen, no, make a switch.
Yeah, I think you can always.
It just
I think
cost.
the best thing is first whether or not you want to become a citizen or not. But then you look at whether or not that's going to be a pathway you could always apply
Resident.
as a permanent resident, and then if you become a citizen, you can, if it's faster, you can then notify them that you've become a citizen and change your preference category.
The preference category, ok. La demora en este momento para los ciudadanos no es muchísimo mejor, así que obviamente la mejor estrategia es aplicar inmediatamente cuando uno llega a los Estados Unidos. Si ustedes se vuelven ciudadanos, siempre pueden cambiar la preferencia de ser residente a ya ser ciudadano americano. Ok, estos son temas que obviamente se pueden discutir un poquito más adelante. Um, so, briefly, without getting too much, because I want to talk about TN visas and H1Bs, which I think are hot topics, and the issue of deportation. Just briefly, could you tell us what? Actually, I want to use a nice word. What is retrogression? People keep hearing about retrogression, and so what is retrogression?
The basic concept is that there are a limited amount of visas each year, each fiscal year, that are allocated, and they're allocated generally by country and by preference class. And when the supply exceeds the demand, when they believe that the supply is going to exceed the demand, they take the prior if they take the visa bulletin priority date and they will move it backwards. So if you think about it sort of linear and time is linear, okay, I've got my place in line. Now I'm just waiting. Sometimes the priority dates can go backwards, and that happens when the demand for the visas is believed to exceed the number.
Okay, so the common question we get is, let's say your priority, currently the priority date, let's say is April of 23, and suddenly could next month suddenly go back to December of 22 or whatever, can go back
Yes, it
and
can go
so
backwards.
go backwards. And the next question is, what if they knew that they had visas for February 23 on, what happened to those visas? Did they disappear? What made the retrogression occur?
So it's a bit of a
Mystery.
it's an estimate. So they set the visa bulletin based on an estimate of the amount of people that they believe are going to apply for those visas. And so if they get an influx of people more than they estimated, then they then retrogress and bring the number back. So
Mhm.
it's a bit of an inexact science,
Mhm.
and that it depends on how many people actually apply in that particular month, and then they use that number to determine whether or not to move it forward or move it backwards. Because the number of visas each year, right, that's set in stone
Mhm.
by the law.
Mhm.
And so they're projecting the demand over 12 months. And so if they get more in a particular month,
Mhm.
then they either don't move their priority dates forward or they may retrogress. If they don't get as much as they thought they would, then they will move your priority date numbers along. So it's just a bit of the government estimating and then seeing how many applications they actually get.
Okay. And this is done by NBC, correct?
Department of State is the
The one who make the estimate.
agency that
Make the estimate. So
estimates.
let me translate that, and then I'm going to ask you a little question on if there is any strategy that if you they become current to rush for some of those visas, so you don't get exposed to a retrogression. But let me translate first. Ah, yo le preguntaba a Kevin que una de las preguntas que recibimos con frecuencia es que si uno tiene una fecha de prioridad, si el boletín de visas dice que esa fecha se volvió corriente, está al día, significa que ya hay visa para esas fechas, que si es posible que un mes después las fechas las echen para atrás, de manera tal que yo estaba al día hoy, digo, en febrero del 23 era mi fecha está corriente, en teoría hay visas, pero cuando sale el boletín de visas del siguiente mes, dice que las visas no están disponibles sino a diciembre del 22. ¿Cómo es eso posible? Y la respuesta es el Departamento de Estado, que es el que hace el estimativo de cuántas visas quedan en el banco y hay disponibles. Ellos hacen un estimativo mes a mes de cuántas visas hay disponible. Y cuando llegan las aplicaciones durante el mes para esas visas, el Departamento de Estado con frecuencia dice: "Oh, me llegaron más aplicaciones que el número de visas que tengo, me toca coger y echar para atrás el número de aplicantes que yo puedo recibir". Y por lo tanto eso hace que cambia o que se eche para atrás, esa es la palabra retrogresión, que se eche para atrás la fecha de cuando las visas en principio, ya a partir de cuando ya hay visas disponibles. Y lo que le pedía a Kevin es que nos explicara si hay estrategias para que si la fecha queda aprobada, que sea usted una de las personas a las cuales le adjudican esas visas, sino que es sujeto a una retrogresión. So, so are there any strategy to make sure that once you get current, that next month you don't get exposed to go back to a retrogression?
So, sort of, I get it depends. If you are filing an adjustment of status, so if you're in the United States, you absolutely want to file. If that window opens up for that month, you absolutely want to try to file during that month.
Okay.
Um, and the reason is even if there's retrogression, you'll have your I-485 in, and that will give you the ability to file for an employment authorization document and a travel document if you would like.
Mhm.
And so even if you're not going to get your green card because there's retrogression, that gives you the ability to file for that work authorization, file for travel, be in the United States legally. And so you absolutely want to be in that window if you are adjusting status. If you're counselor processing, you don't really control it because you're waiting for the embassy to, you know,
Give you the
to call
appointment.
you for your interview. So there's not much that you can do unless like if you're able to pay, your NVC fees and get your application in. Certainly you can do it during that window, but you're sort of at the mercy of the
Yeah.
embassy for them scheduling you for an interview.
Mhm.
So it's less important if you're consulate processing.
Correct. During the consular processes, even if you pay expedite, it's rare that during that month the consulate will actually take you in during that
Yeah,
same month.
very rare. Maybe if it was a consulate that doesn't get a lot of immigrant visas, and so if there's not a wait at that particular consulate, maybe. But I would say it's really rare for you to get an interview within a month.
Yeah, I don't think those consulates exist.
Very, very, very rare.
Ok, so la respuesta es la siguiente. Tu fecha se vuelve corriente el día de hoy. Si la persona obviamente se encuentra en los Estados Unidos, uno quiere aplicar inmediatamente porque durante ese mes, estando aquí físicamente en los Estados Unidos, porque no hay que ir por el proceso consular, eh, la persona puede obtener, si no le dan la visa durante ese mes obtiene inmediatamente el permiso de trabajo, inclusive documentación para poder entrar y salir del país sin ningún problema. La cuestión con las personas que están por fuera es que aun cuando se vuelve activa, estás de todas maneras a la merced del consulado propio donde te encuentras. Y digamos sin excepción, durante ese mes el consulado no te va a dar una cita, una entrevista para que vayas hasta que los papeles llegan al consulado, terminas de hacer los exámenes, etcétera, etcétera, y todo. Normalmente el proceso consular tiene una demora, tiene unos meses de demora. Así que si hay una retrogresión en la fecha de un mes para otro, básicamente vuelves a quedar en línea esperando la nueva parte del proceso. But what happened if your papers are already filed and you're asking those are valid, they will remain there just waiting for the new date, correct?
So, do you mean if they're already
You
with
send the
like
paperwork right away. It became current within the next 2 weeks. You send all the paperwork, so NBC is ready for consular processing. But
at
you
that
might have
point
to reapply.
you're waiting for your interview, and if there's a retrogression that occurs,
Mhm.
they'll stop processing your application until it becomes forward, but you don't have to reapply or anything. You'll already be documentarily qualified and your spot in line is safe. You're just waiting then for the number to come back
The
to
new
current.
bulletin board who will give you clearance.
Yeah.
Sí, sí, obviamente se mete la aplicación durante ese mes, si aún está ya, no tienes que volver a aplicar, pero obviamente la ponen en espera hasta que nuevamente tu fecha se ponga al día. Ok, um, so this is almost 12 years of visa bulletins. You want me to say something? Do you want to say something a little bit about them?
So when I look at this, what I would say that you should take away from this is understanding that the wait times go up and down. So if you look at it for the most of the last 12 years or so, there's been little to no wait for EB3s. And then there are peaks of time where it takes several years. We happen to be in a time where we're in a peak, but you can see that it's on the downswing. So that's what I think is important, that it goes up and down. There are times where there's no wait. There's time where there's a wait. Right now, we're trending downward, but there is about 2.5 year wait.
Lo que ustedes están viendo en pantalla es casi 12 años de historial del boletín de visas, que es el que determina qué tan rápido. Como ustedes se dan cuenta, durante esos 12 años han habido periodos muy largos donde no hay ninguna espera. Significa que una vez que tu proceso está aprobado, en realidad no hay ninguna espera para que le den a uno una visa, pero han habido periodos, como lo ven en la gráfica, donde hay picos y hay demoras de 2 o 3 años en teoría. Pero como ustedes se dan cuenta, ellos resuelven en un periodo relativamente corto. Lo que ustedes están viendo, es la situación post pandemia que creó obviamente una cuestión un poquito rara, dentro del sistema migratorio y obviamente había subido, había bajado, volvió a subir, otra vez está empezando a bajar. Estamos esperando que la situación obviamente se normalice un poco más, pero ese es más o menos donde nos encontramos en este momento, en aproximadamente unos 2 años de espera para las visas, el banco de visas de te dé en principio una visa. Okay, so the some key topics about this that I wanted to make sure that we cover, Kevin. Let's talk first about our friends from Mexico and Canada. Okay, let's talk about TN visas. Um, let's talk a little bit about, maybe give us a tiny bit of an explanation. What's a work visa and what's the difference between that and the EB3? Just a very brief explanation because obviously many hospitals are willing to do the work visa plus the EB3, almost all hospitals. But and then we'll focus for a second on the TM visas. We'll talk a little about people who are on asylum status and TPS, and we'll talk a little bit about the H-1B. I think the other ones we don't have to spend too much time on them.
Sure. So the difference between a T or a work visa and the EB3 is a work visa is going to be temporary. So that's going to be something that's set for a number of years, depending on the particular visa, and it's going to be a temporary option. The EB3 is going to be a green card, and that's going to be a permanent option. So, what green card holders are called permanent residents because that means that it's not for a set amount of years. If you get your green card, you can have your green card forever.
Correct. You can live the rest of your life in the United States as a
Correct.
resident. La diferencia importante entre visas que dan permiso de trabajo y obviamente la residencia permanente es que todas las visas de trabajo tienen expiración. Son por un tiempo limitado. Hay que renovarlas en algunos casos. En algunos casos no se pueden renovar. Con la diferencia de la visa. La visa del Green Card, que simplemente mantiene un estatus de manera permanente y te puedes sacar a vivir por el resto de tu vida en los Estados Unidos y obviamente te da la ruta para volverte un ciudadano americano. ¿Ok? Vamos a hablar unos minutos primero sobre la visa TN, que aplica para México y para el Canadá. Vamos a charlar y después vamos a hablar de otras visas para los demás países. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about TN visas. Why we love Mexican nurses and we love Canadian nurses. What's so appealing about a TN visa?
I think the biggest thing that's appealing is the speed. You
Uh-huh.
can get a TN visa extremely quick.
Mhm.
So while we're talking about, a couple of years for the EV3 process, so you're waiting to come to the United States for, 2.5, 3 years. With the TN, if you're Canadian, you could be talking about a matter of a week. If you're from Mexico, you could be talking about a matter of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right? So very, very, very quickly obtainable with very low costs to an employer.
Mhm. Ok, so lo importante con con esta visa, la visa TN que aplica solamente para canadienses y para mexicanos, es lo rápido que se pueden obtener. Una vez que el empleador hizo una oferta, la persona puede llegar a los Estados Unidos a través de una de estas visas a trabajar formalmente y legalmente en los Estados Unidos y hacer el resto del proceso para obtener su green card mientras que ya está viviendo y trabajando en los Estados Unidos. Kevin nos menciona que para un canadiense, obviamente, una visa de esta se puede obtener tan rápido como en una semana. Para un mexicano, normalmente unas 6 a 8 semanas es la demora para obtener una de estas visas. La ventaja que quiero que entiendan es que los hospitales les gusta mucho poderte traer, si eres mexicano o si eres canadiense, primero para que llegues lo más pronto posible a través de la visa TN y tan pronto llegas, hacen la misma aplicación que te han prometido, lo mismo que le prometen a toda la gente para su residencia permanente, mientras que ya estás trabajando en vez de esperar por fuera del país a que te salga la residencia, ya estás viviendo y trabajando en los Estados Unidos y la residencia te sale cuando ya estás acá. So what I was explaining that the reason hospitals will make the same EB3 application while they are working as a TN, but they are physically already living and working. Are there any limitations with TN visas? That can I go in and out of the country? Can I bring my family? Are there any limitations with TN visas?
So there are limitations with TN visas, but in terms of can I go in and out of the country? Yes. The answer to that is yes. You'll have a passport visa. You can, leave the country as long as you have a valid passport visa. If you're from Mexico, um, Canadians don't actually need passport visa. So, but yes, you can leave the country. In terms, you can bring your family, same, spouse and children under 21 qualify for TD visas. The thing to consider with spouses is that they do not get work authorization themselves. So bringing a spouse on a TD, yes, they can come, live here, but they are not work eligible.
Unless they find an employer who will
Yeah,
make them an
if they
offer.
find some other sponsorship, so if they're eligible for a TN themselves or an H-1B or something else, find someone to sponsor them, then certainly independently they can be eligible.
So a common question, for example, the nurse arrive and their spouse decides to work, just to make it something simple, found very quickly a job as I don't know, in a restaurant, for example, working at a restaurant. The letter of employment from the restaurant is good enough to obtain the TN visa.
Um, Not exactly. So I guess the first thing would be there are only certain occupations that are eligible for TNs.
Mhm.
So you'd have to, the occupation that the person that the family member would be taking would have to be an occupation that's on the list. Um, if if that's true, if the occupation was an occupation that was on the list, they could obtain a TN visa by like if they're Canadian going to like the border
Mhm.
with a letter from the employer and
Mhm.
then re-entering,
Yeah.
uh, or they can file an application with the USCIS and not leave the United States. So there are two ways.
Okay. Occupations within a hospital. If I take an employment within a hospital as in um, in food and nutrition, in I don't know, in security, on one of those, will those be considered occupations, or those occupations are also out of the list?
Those would not be occupations that are on the list. Um, it's generally going to be occupations that require some sort of educational degree.
Okay.
Like registered nurse. So maybe if they were like a dietitian in a hospital,
Yeah.
yes, or a nutritionist, something like that, a
Mhm.
medical lab. technologist.
What about technician titles like pharmacy tech or um, mm, a technical degree? Will all those qualify?
So a pharmacist would, but not a farm tech.
Mhm.
Uh, so pharmacist is on the list, but not a farm tech. They're medical tech, a medical laboratory technologist would
Yeah,
qualify.
will qualify. But that's a full blown like no degree. Okay. Hay algunas ventajas y obviamente desventajas con las visas de trabajo, con la visa TN. Obviamente tú sí puedes traer a la familia bajo las mismas reglas, cónyuge casado, hijos menores de 21 años. Lo importante es que sepan que las visas que ellos reciben para venir no permiten que ellos trabajen. La opción de trabajar para ellos depende de que haya un empleador y que ellos van a obtener una visa de trabajo con el otro empleador. Las visas TN, hay una lista de ocupaciones que se pueden utilizar bajo esas. Obviamente enfermeros profesionales califican, pero profesiones que no tengan un título, un título universitario en general no clasifican para la obtención de una de las visas TN. La familia los puede acompañar, pero no pueden legalmente trabajar en los Estados Unidos. ¿Ok? Very good. I think we convey most of the key points on that. Uh, what's the difference? What happened for those who are not Mexican and Canadian? What's the route for them? What's the similar thing for as a TN visa? The
So I would say the next most popular thing is probably H-1B
Mhm,
for non-Canadian, non-Mexican nurses. It's probably the most popular uh, second option right now.
mhm,
Uh, and the H-1B is for occupations that require at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent as an entry to the profession.
mhm,
So with registered nurses, the thing to think about is one, whether or not the particular hospital, the position that they're hiring for requires at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent, or whether that nurse has some sort of specialized training or certification, anything like that. Those are going to qualify individuals for H-1Bs. It's becoming more popular because historically H-1Bs have been, I would say, mostly unavailable to RNs.
mhm.
But we're seeing a lot more clients go that route.
But Kevin, because this is a problem that people don't understand that there is a professional problem with nurses and the H-1B visa that they don't seem to quite understand what the issue is and I think this is part of what we need to sort of clarify that H-1B is to obtain one of those visas, you must be a professional. You have to have a professional degree. Professional degree means that you have to have gone through a university degree to obtain those visas. And the problem with the nursing profession is that the associate degrees, who are not a full blown, do get the uh, the possibilities to work as any other professional nurse, but that makes them not eligible for H-1Bs. And because the job descriptions are written for either one, and hospitals operate using both of them, it makes getting H-1Bs a real problem for most hospitals.
That's absolutely correct. It's certainly more difficult. I think it is something that it depends on the situation. So,
Mhm.
um, I think the best strategies or the best thing way to think about it is like if you're a magnet hospital and you hire, primarily BSNs, then that's going to make your case stronger because that's what you generally hire those BSNs.
Mhm.
If you look at the demographics of your organization and you have, you know, 20% BSNs and 80% ADNs, then that's not going to be really compelling that a bachelor's degree is required to work in your hospital. So
And
those are more difficult.
there are two other issues before I translate. Oh, you know what? Let me translate and then we'll cover those issues. Um, es importante. Existe otra visa de trabajo que existe para, obviamente, profesionales de otros países que no sean México y Canadá. Es la visa H1B. La visa H1B permite a aquellos que tienen un título profesional, universitario profesional pueden en principio solicitar una de estas visas de trabajo. Hay varias cuestiones adicionales con estas visas y uno de los más importantes es que los enfermeros profesionales en Estados Unidos hay dos títulos que clasifican como enfermeros profesionales en teoría. Obviamente las licenciaturas, el equivalente a los grados universitarios, pero los profesionales los programas de associate, de técnicos avanzados, digámoslo así, en enfermería clasifican y reciben y los contratan igualmente que contratan a los licenciados. Ese título hace que en principio la profesión de enfermeros profesionales como tal no clasifiquen para estas visas, en principio. ¿Por qué? Porque la mayoría de los hospitales en su descripción, en su solicitud de empleados, utilizan el uno o el otro, utilizan los licenciados y los técnicos superiores de manera indiscriminada en el trabajo. Cuando eso sucede, obviamente no los vuelve en realidad no elegibles para que ellos puedan solicitar a licenciados este tipo de una serie de complicaciones. Obviamente algunos hospitales que tienen algunos estatus en alguna situación donde la gran mayoría de sus empleados son exclusivamente licenciados y no tienen muchos técnicos, pueden solicitar en principio algunos casos o bajo algunas circunstancias, pero esto es uno de los grandes motivos, sin entrar obviamente en todos los detalles, por los cuales obtener una visa H1B para venir a trabajar como enfermero profesional en los Estados Unidos no es tan sencillo. Kevin, I want to add two additional things. There is also a significant number of people requesting this. The quota, the number of visas is also limited, and there is a lot of professionals, not just nurses, applying for them. Let's talk a little bit about the lottery and bypassing the lottery about these visas too.
Sure. So H-1Bs are subject to a quota, an annual quota, just like EB-3s, except for it's much smaller. So generally there's 65,000 H-1Bs available to individuals with bachelor's degrees, and then there's an additional 20,000 that are available for individuals who have advanced degrees, master's or higher. Um, and once a year, they have a random lottery to decide who is eligible to apply for those visas. Um,
What are the odds of obtaining one of those?
oh, it changes year to year, but I'll call it 10 to 15%.
One in 10, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Ah, Obviamente el banco de visas H1B, igual que el banco de visas EB3, hay un número limitado de visas disponibles, mucho más bajo, y hay todo tipo de profesional puede aplicar a este, no solo los enfermeros pueden aplicar a esto, y dependiendo. del nivel de preparación de la persona. Hay obviamente segregaciones de esas visas, pero básicamente hay una lotería a quien cada año puede aplicar por esas visas. Esa lotería más o menos el chance de obtenerlo en la primera pasada es más o menos un 10 a 15% de que te salga la lotería de una de esas visas. However, in the case that the hospitals can actually do apply for an H-1B, there is a way to bypass the lottery, correct?
For some hospitals. So for
For some
nonprofit
hospitals.
hospitals who have an affiliation with a university or institution of higher education, um, they are not subject to that annual lottery process and that quota.
Correct.
So if you get a nonprofit hospital that has a formal affiliation with a school, um, then they can get H-1Bs any time of the year and unlimited amount.
Ok. Hay una forma de bypassar esto y es algunos hospitales, la mayoría no califican, que son sin ánimo de lucro y que además tienen una afiliación académica universitaria. Pueden en principio solicitar de manera ilimitada estas visas. No tienen que ser parte de la lotería de estas visas. Obviamente eso descalifica a un número bastante grande de hospitales de que de todas maneras. And Kevin, there is another thing. These visas are not like TNs who are relatively inexpensive. These visas are expensive, just like an EB3 visa. So a
They
hospital who
are.
is willing to go and do both, what happened to their cost?
They go up significantly. If a hospital is going to do both, they go up, the price goes up significantly. The fees alone for just applying for the visa are generally going to be, a little bit over $3,000. And then if you add in like a premium processing to the mix, it's going to be closer to like $6,000, right? So, and that's before you've paid like your lawyer or anything like that. So it can get pricey
Ujú.
quick.
Ok. Y hay otro detalle con estas visas. Le estoy tratando de clarificar esto a mucha gente que oye muchas cosas en el internet. Estas visas no son gratis, son, al contrario, son bastante caras. Estas visas, dependiendo, no, a diferencia de las visas TNs, que en realidad no tienen gran costo, estas visas son bastante costosas. Básicamente más que, aproximadamente les dobla el costo a un hospital de hacer la aplicación si tiene que pagar por esta visa más pagar por la visa de la residencia permanente. La sola visa más el no, proceso expedado, sin contar los gastos de abogados, nada, por eso está cercano a los $6,000. Entonces esto aumenta muchísimo los costos. Esto es uno de los grandes motivos por los cuales muchos hospitales no tienen mucho interés en ir a través de este proceso. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the two other hot topics, and I don't want to prolong this too much because otherwise, we can be here for 10 hours answering all of this. But just briefly, let's talk a little bit about because this is really hot because of the new government. What's going on with people who came to the United States on TPS? And people who, in principle, have an application for asylum.
Sure. So, what's going on with TPS is that the government has been canceling or not renewing TPS in most cases, and in some cases shortening the current TPS for some countries. What that really means is it's not go it's generally for most countries not available beyond a certain date. And so historically what we've seen is that TPS has been continued to be renewed year after year for
Mhm.
most countries because the situations continue to be bad in those countries. Um, but what we're seeing with the current administration is that they are not renewing TPS.
Mhm.
Um, they've canceled CPS for a number of countries already. We are in the next 60 days. TPS for countries like Honduras, which has had TPS for over 25 years, is no longer going to be available. So, um, for anybody that may be here on TPS, they're looking for other options right now to either stay in the United States or the ability to come back to the United States at some point.
So, if in theory, if you are not eligible and there are no other routes eligible to renew your TPS, you legally have to leave the country.
You,
Voluntarily, you have to leave the country.
right. So you should, right? That's
Mhm.
what you should do.
Mhm.
Some people, I'm sure some people will stay, right? Their
Mhm.
lives, they've been here for 25 years.
Yeah.
But legally, if your TPS ends and there's nothing else that you can do, if there's no legal pathway to keep you, at that point you start to accrue unlawful presence. And unlawful presence, once you get to a certain number of days, can bar you from the United States for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, depending on the time period, or permanently. And so you want to make sure that you're at least departing before one of those bars attaches to you, because that may limit your ability to come to the United States in the future legally on an EB3, for example.
Mhm. Ok, so, estamos hablando de aquellos que entraron a los Estados Unidos bajo las visas que se llamaban TPS, de protección temporal. Normalmente la tradición ha sido de que desde que la situación en esos países no haya cambiado, el gobierno con frecuencia simplemente extiende esas visas donde le permiten a la persona continuar en este país legalmente, trabajando y todo el asunto bajo ese tipo de visas. La nueva administración del gobierno está cerrando las renovaciones de esas visas. Uno de los ejemplos que está mencionando Kevin, por ejemplo, es el Honduras. Es un país que por 25 años ha tenido el estatus de poder, algunas personas que fueron elegibles para el estado de protección, en cuestión de un mes o dos, no van a poder volver a renovar esas visas. ¿Qué pasa con esos individuos? si uno, si no hay otra vía legal para mantenerse en los Estados Unidos, en realidad la única ruta es salir del país. No se puede quedar aquí. Obviamente hay ciertos niveles de cuántos días te quedas de ilegal. Si te quedas un tiempo menor, te pueden detener por 3 años que no puedes volver, o por 5 años, o por 10 años, o de manera permanente. Entonces es importante que estén conversando eh, con una persona, un abogado, una persona que les pueda decir cuáles recursos hay disponibles o cuáles recursos hay no disponibles. El hecho de que un hospital te haga una oferta de trabajo y haga tu aplicación para un EB3, si tu visa TPS expira antes de que tu visa EB3 ha sido obtenida, estás ilegal. I'm trying to explain to them, if you are on a TPS, the hospital may make you an offer and may apply for your EB3. But if your TPS expires before your EB3 comes through, you are illegally and you will lose that visa. Okay? You have to find, si te quedas acá, si el hospital te hace una oferta, inclusive si el hospital paga y mete los papeles a, a nombre tuyo, y tú puedes trabajar un par de meses con el hospital, si te quedas de ilegal, pierdes el derecho a esa visa. Significa, y el hospital está obligado en un momento dado de básicamente echarte. Esto es una situación que les recomendamos mucho que estén hablando con con un abogado, y busquen cuáles son las potenciales alternativas que ustedes tienen. Esto sí es una consecuencia de una decisión administrativa del actual gobierno. ¿Ok? So, what's going on with people who has applied for asylum? First of all, Kevin, there is a bigger misunderstanding. What was the name of the application people use? When they come to they fill out the information to go to present themselves to the border. Something one.
PBP one.
CBP one, okay? A lot of people think that because they fill out the information on their CBP one, that automatically grant, and they presented themselves to an immigration officer and they were allowed to come in, that somehow they already have asylum, a petition of asylum in the United States. And there is a large number of people who has somehow that misconception that somehow because they legally or they fill out the information on the CPT-1 and presented themselves and somehow were given a date that somehow they are already automatically in an asylum process. Um, can you clarify that for a lot of people?
Yeah, so CBP one was sort of to streamline it. It was a process that was sort of initially launched in late 2020, and it was really sort of to um, allow individuals to schedule appointments at certain ports of entry in the United States, um, to enter for a number of years, to be paroled in. Some of those included individuals that were asylum seekers, but not everyone who came in with the CBP one was someone who was seeking asylum. So they're two separate things. CBP one allowed individuals to be paroled, and there was a independent basis for employment authorization with CBP one at the time. And so individuals who may have entered on CBP one may have entered on a parole process that has now been revoked. And so um, it's I guess, maybe a common misconception of that asylum and CBP one are the same thing. They're not the same thing. So individuals were able to get CBP one work authorization and didn't file for asylum. And some individuals entered on CBP one and then, in addition to that, filed asylum application. So they're really two separate things. And so they're two separate mechanisms for someone to have had status in the United States and work authorization in the United States.
So most of those parolees have been revoked, correct?
Yeah, CBP one parole has been revoked, and then Cuban, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan, Haitian parole has also been revoked. Um, and they are, even if individuals have employment authorization documents that may have validity left on them,
Uh-huh.
the government has revoked those in the last, 30 days.
Mhm. So those work authorizations have been no basically
Yeah.
stopped. So for practical purposes, those individuals right now are illegally in the United States.
Yes.
So they have two choices, basically either uh, formally leave the country, and then there will hopefully will be no additional consequences to them because they chose to leave the country, or to remain illegal in the United States and risk. Now, for those individuals, I just want to make sure that people know that hostels cannot solve that problem in any way, shape, or form. And if you remain illegal in the United States, no hospital is really going to make an application for you.
That's absolutely right. The the only I guess, maybe trying to think of the best way to put it. Generally, staying in the United States is going to have immigration consequences down the road. If you're staying without authorization, with the only real exception being if you are married to a U.S. citizen. If you entered legally, overstayed, and are married to a U.S. citizen, that overstay is forgiven. But that's really the only time. So it has real consequences. If you stay over 180 days, that's a
Mhm.
3-year bar.
Correct. Okay. Um, estamos discutiendo un poquito de la situación de las personas que tienen o han solicitado asilo. Primero, estamos clarificándole a muchas personas que aplicaron a través de la aplicación a CPT-1 y les dieron un parole, el estado de parole acá por un tiempo y les dieron inclusive permiso de trabajo, que eso ha sido completamente eliminado por la nueva administración. Inclusive las personas que tenían ah, todavía tiempo en sus permisos de trabajo. En los próximos, oficialmente el gobierno dijo que en los próximos 30 días todos quedan expirados. Así que esas personas en este momento están, todos los que entraron con el CPT-1, que creen que están en un automático proceso de asilo, no es correcto. Esas personas se van a encontrar con la desafortunada situación que ellos o tienen que salir del país o tienen que o van a permanecer en el país de manera ilegal. Si entran de manera si están de manera ilegal, ningún hospital, porque eso tiene consecuencias, va a tener mucho interés de entrar al proceso legal de tratar de resolver esa situación. Estas personas es diferente de las personas que pues, habiendo entrado por esa forma o por otra forma, hicieron una aplicación formal de asilo. Eso es diferente. Vamos a hablar sobre eso. So, a person who officially made an asylum application, can we work with those individuals?
Yes. So someone who formally made an asylum application, um, after that application has been pending for 180 days, they are eligible for an employment authorization document while their case continues to process. Um, Asylum cases can take several years. I mean, some cases 8 years, 9 years, depending on they could be adjudicated quickly or they can take a long time. So in the interim, while someone's waiting, there is the ability after 180 days for that individual to get interim work authorization, which would allow them to work at a hospital.
Okay.
Um,
And and usually before I translate, the hostel will prefer to let the process if the asylum was okay. I guess the question is, uh, are most asylum application approved, and is it a good thing for the hospital to wait to see if it gets approved or not before they file for an EB3, or should the hospital try to file right away? What's the best way, in other words, for a hospital to handle an asylum case?
I would say I wouldn't say that most asylum cases are approved. I would say that it's probably less. I don't know what the statistics are, but I think the to say most of them are approved, I wouldn't say that's accurate. I think good asylum cases are approved, and so the asylum cases are all going to be based on whether or not an individual has demonstrated, a well-founded fear of prosecution,
Mhm,
or they've experienced some sort of prosecution in their home country based on like their race, religion, political opinion, or membership in a particular group. And so, depending on it, if you've been persecuted in your home country based on, your race or your religion or political opinion in the past, and you're able to provide proof of that, you're going to have a strong asylum case. If you're doing it to, try to bridge the gap, um, and you don't have a strong case, it's likely to be denied. And I think in those cases, depending on how long the application has been filed and how long it's been pending, the hospital may decide that, okay, we're going to wait on the outcome of that.
mhm,
Uh, if you have an asylum case that's been pending for a long time, my guess is the hospital is probably going to say, probably want to talk about, okay, what's the basis of it? Did you work with someone on that case? Find out, what the likelihood of success is, and then make a call on whether or not to try to do EB3.
To try to, okay. So as you were answering that, and before I translate, in fiscal year 2024, there were over 100,000 affirmative asylum cases completed. That's what AI is telling me. Uh, and it says that they estimate the grant rate to be 53% of represented applicants and only 19% of unrepresented applicants. I'm not sure the difference between the two, but just to give you the most recent statistic on asylum cases. Is that a good number? Not a good number?
So the representative is going to be someone who's represented by attorney, so
Uh-huh.
53. So that's sort of a 50-50 shot, right?
Yeah, 50
Of
show,
getting
which is actually
approved.
much better than 19%.
Yeah. And then your 19% is low likelihood of success if you're going to do it on your own. Um, and I think, I mean, that's right. Like even a seasoned asylum attorney who's been doing it for a long time is going to have a 50-50 shot, right? It's going to depend on
Mhm.
the facts of the particular case. So it certainly is not high probability. But if you have strong facts, a strong case, that could certainly be a route. And an asylum case results in a green card as well. So,
Mhm.
depending on the facts, what I would say is if you believe that you have a strong asylum case, you should talk to an asylum attorney and have a consult with them. And
And
they
make
can,
sure the asylum is really being represented because the
Mhm.
odds are. But if an asylum attorney comes to you and say, Kevin, I have a really good case here. This nurse is a particular case we anticipate no to have a favorable decision on this case. Will you wait for the EB3 and just let the asylum case take its course, or will you suggest the hospital still do the EB3 case,
I I would suggest that the hospital still do the EB3 case.
no
I
matter
hate
what?
I hate to put my eggs all in one basket.
Mhm.
And so I would suggest if because I think the only thing you're risking is money, and
Mhm.
I think you're going to get that back investing in a high quality nurse
Yeah.
tenfold.
And while the asylum is pending, the nurse is still working for you anyway. So
Right.
you're still getting your money's worth.
Hmm.
That will be okay. So let me translate that and then I'll extend that. There are two parts. And I apologize, we are extending this so much, but estamos hablando de las personas que hicieron una aplicación de asilo, la persona que entró por algún método a los Estados Unidos, hizo una aplicación formal de asilo. Eh, una persona, la mayoría de los casos de asilo, muchos de los casos de asilo no son necesariamente o no porque hiciste la aplicación, significa que te van a dar el green card a través de ese proceso. La estadística del año pasado es que hubieron más o menos unos 100,000 casos de asilo resueltos en los Estados Unidos. Aquellos que se hicieron a través de un abogado, el chance de que resultaran favorables ha sido 50-53%, digamos, es como 50-50. Las personas que decidieron hacer el proceso sin utilizar un abogado, el porcentaje está por debajo del 20%, uno de cada cinco. Significa que si alguna persona que está aquí en esta charla, que está en un proceso y que no tiene representación legal, nuestra sugerencia es sus chances de que el proceso le salga favorable cuando usted está representado por un abogado con experiencia en el área de asilo es bastante importante. La siguiente pregunta es, personas que tienen un proceso de asilo pendiente. Si el hospital hace simultáneamente la aplicación para el Green Card para que la persona tenga las dos rutas, la ruta de que le salga el Green Card am, por su asilo o le salga su Green Card a través del proceso de empleador. Y nuestra recomendación, obviamente, a nuestros hospitales es que la aplicación para el EB3 se haga para tener esa ruta abierta. Es una cuestión de una pequeña inversión comparada para las personas y la persona que está bajo un asilo, si ha estado aquí más de 180 días, básicamente medio año, ya tiene permiso de trabajo y puede normalmente trabajar y permanecer bajo ese estatus en los Estados Unidos. So I think I did a good summary of what we discussed. So the question is, uh, if I've been here illegal, can I apply for asylum at any time? I think that's another myth. People think that you can apply for asylum anytime you want, uh, even if you were here illegal 5 years or 3 years. Is there such a thing?
There is not. So um, the rule is that you need to apply for asylum within 1 year of your most recent entry to the United States. Um, there are two exceptions to the rule. But they are the general rule is 1 year within your most recent entry to the United States, unless there's some sort of change in circumstances in your home country
Mhm,
uh, that may make you eligible or would have justified that lack of filing within the 1 year,
mhm,
or some sort of extraordinary circumstances that caused you that would excuse your failure to have filed within the 1 year. For example, maybe you were, hospitalized and you missed the 1 year because you
mhm.
were in the hospital for 3 months and you get out and you immediately file. Well, that may be a reason to excuse the 1 year, but generally it's one within 1 year.
Ok. Aquellos que tienen esa idea de que uno puede aplicar a un asilo en cualquier momento, no importa si uno ha estado aquí legal o no, eso no es verdad. Con algunas excepciones que son complicadas de justificar, pero se pueden, la mayoría de gente tiene un año desde el momento de su entrada a los Estados Unidos para hacer una aplicación formal para un proceso de asilo. Will a person getting out of a TPS, can they make an application for an asylum? Does that grant them out? And I mean, you have to justify that there is a reason to ask for an asylum, but was TPS a good reason for you to be also asking for an asylum because you were not on a temporary protection portion?
I think it depends on who you ask. I don't think it's that strong. I wouldn't discourage people from doing it, but certainly it's possible. But I think you have to couple that with some sort of change in the circumstance. Certainly, you had TPS and now it's no longer available, but I think you would have to articulate a reason as to some sort of change in the circumstance in your home country
Mhm,
to make a strong case.
correct.
Uh, because even though you were on TPS, you always had the ability to have filed asylum, even though you were on TPS. So, from the government's perspective, you could have done this within 1 year. Why should we excuse it?
Excuse it for that. And for a person who was also on a parole, in the CPT-1 parole, been here more than a year, not an excuse.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. If there's some reason to, articulate some sort of change in circumstances to justify it,
Mhm,
you could try it, but I think that the likely answer from the government in most cases is going to be you knew that this was temporary. If you really felt that there was some sort of fear, you would have done it within 1 year,
mhm.
and you did not do that, and so we're not going to allow you to
Make that
proceed.
application. Um, Le estoy preguntando a Kevin en particular que si las personas que estaban en TPS, eh, sobre todo si han pasado más de un año de estar acá, que si eso se puede utilizar como una de las razones por las cuales uno pudo solicitar asilo. Y el comentario en general es, no es una muy buena justificación, en principio es una mala justificación y es no muy probable que el gobierno te acepte que no hubieras aplicado al asilo aún habiendo estado bajo la protección temporal de la visa. Y lo mismo aplica para aquellos que estaban bajo una situación de parole. Kevin, they're asking me to repeat with the countries that you mentioned. Obviously, the TPS countries, we know what they are: Venezuela, uh, um, Nicaragua,
Nicaragua, Nepal, Honduras,
Honduras,
Haiti,
Haiti, and Cuba.
Cuba.
Mhm.
Um,
I think those were the five, right?
uh,
And yeah,
I think there are, let me see. I think there might be a few more countries that have TPS, but
Ukraine, I believe, have
yeah,
applied.
Ukraine
Ukraine,
has humanitarian parole. It's similar.
yeah.
They also have TPS. I think there is a TPS for Lebanon, El Salvador, Ethiopia,
Mhm.
Cameroon, Afghanistan, Sudan, South Sudan, Syria.
Okay. So that's the humanitarian. Kevin, just to wrap up, last final commentary. The government has, we happen to have a nurse from Iran
Hmm.
who happened to receive a official um, employment, no, from a, well, it has an offer of employment by a hospital, and I'm not 100% sure if I think their I-140 has already been applied.
Yep, it's
However,
been approved.
it's been approved, correct? I think you are handling that case.
Yep.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. So what about that nurse? Is that person going to be able to make it through? I
I
mean,
think,
let's explain that to people that Iran, among, I don't recall, there are 6 or 7 countries that have been completely banned from entering the United States.
yeah. So there currently are 12 with
Wow.
a total ban, and I think seven with a partial ban. Um, so the the current administration has implemented a travel ban for 12 countries. I wrote them down so that I could say them just in case people wanted to know. But you can look it up too.
Yeah.
Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Iran, Haiti, um, Afghanistan, Chad, Burma, Republic of the Congo. I can't read my handwriting. Eritrea and Equatorial Guinea. I think those
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
are. So those are going to be the countries that are subject to the total travel ban. Uh, and so what that practically means for an individual like our individual from Iran is right now, because citizens of Iran are banned from getting visas, is that that individual is not going to be eligible to get the visa, so complete the final step until that travel ban is lifted.
Mhm.
So
Even if
uh,
that person, let's say, were to travel to a country, another country, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or somewhere in Europe, and go through one of those embassies, that
yeah,
person will not be eligible to get an embassy appointment.
correct, because it's going to be he's a citizen of that country, so it bans citizens of those particular countries
Mhm.
from obtaining visas. So um, the I guess what I would say is, I think your initial question is that person going to be able to, to come? I think the answer to that is yes. I just think it's going to take time and probably longer than everybody else.
Mhm.
Um,
They will
uh,
have to wait for a change of administration, most likely, for the ban to be
yeah,
lifted.
yeah,
But the priority date may become current. So that means once that is lifted, they probably can go almost right away
yeah.
in the
So
process.
it's either going to be one of two things, either a change of administration, which we saw before. This is not the first time we had a travel ban from this administration.
Mhm.
So a train change of the administration, or um, they've said that the reason why these countries are banned is for security reasons. So a change in whatever the security reason is for that particular country. So, if the countries meet whatever the United States security demands are, then maybe it gets lifted with this administration. But I think the more likely thing is that you'll see if there's a new administration, the travel ban would be lifted with that new administration.
Ok. Am, brevemente para traducirlos, en este momento la administración puso un, un ban, am, una restricción hay básicamente 12 países en el mundo y hay otros 7 con una restricción parcial, a las cuales no les permiten venir, viajar a los Estados Unidos. Am, Kevin leyó la lista, no me acuerdo todos los nombres, pero Irán en particular, que es el caso que estamos hablando, es uno de las listas. Este enfermero que está en el proceso y tiene en principio un priority date, el problema no es que él no pueda eventualmente llegar, en este momento él no puede entrar a un proceso consular, por lo tanto no va a poder obtener una visa en el futuro cercano. Esto ya había pasado, esto ya ha pasado muchas veces. Lo más probable es que la próxima administración levante el problema. La respuesta básica es, ¿ese enfermero va a llegar a los Estados Unidos? La respuesta es sí. La cuestión es cuestión de tiempo. ¿Cuándo va a llegar? Si va a llegar en los próximos 2 años o va a demorarse 4 años llegando. Um, Kevin, I'm going to leave it there for today. I took over 2 hours of your time. I'm just going to say briefly I got a million questions, but there are a couple of questions that I just want to mention. I'm going to, TN visas apply to técnicos generales de Mexico too. Um, there are no restriction on TN visas for those who have a técnico general. They are not officially a BSN. They are the ADN of Mexico. Can they apply for a TN visa? Or do they? I know the list is similar to H-1B. Do they get disqualified from TN visas?
So they are likely not, is the degree the same as only 2 years?
Yes, it's about think of that as being an ADN instead of a BSN. Is the equivalence of they will actually when they do their paperwork uh, they will become a registered RM, but their degree is equivalent to an ADN, an associate degree.
So they're going to need to have sort of that, they're going to need a bachelor's degree. So every TN um, occupation lists what the requirements are. So uh, bachelor's degree and a state or provincial license is required.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I missed that piece.
So if you look at the TN list, it tells you sort of for every occupation what the degree is required. But
Mhm.
for an RN, it's going to be a bachelor's degree and then a state or uh, province license.
Yeah, so it has to be so TN uh, only applies for licensed nurse for BSNs, not for ADNs. Okay.
Yes.
Um, I guess I'm just gonna skip everything else. There's lots and lots of other questions, but I think we cover most everything. Um, Kevin, thank you very much. I know we can do million of these sessions and there will always be, but my general recommendation to people is you're in good hands. Once your process, no, we cannot give you green light. We always consult with Kevin if there is any reason that we will not give you green light. But once we give you green light, you are in great hands with Kevin to try to no get all your issues resolved. Again, thank you very much. Um,
Absolutely.
um, one minor thing I wanted to say to people is the government is not going after nurses who have green cards and send them back to their countries. People think that because they're that somehow the administration is going after anybody who's not a citizen and sending them, no, deporting everything back to their country. Could you just make a final mention on that so people don't?
No, I think that's absolutely right. So legal immigration is still thriving in what I still consider to be the backbone of the United States. If people were being deported legally, I'd be out of a job for having legal immigration. I do a ton of H-1Bs, TNs, O's, L's, EB3s, EB2s. I'm still doing those. It hasn't stopped. It's probably increased with people looking for other options. So
Mhm.
uh, that stuff is still alive and well. And um, if you are here on a green card, you don't have anything to worry about being deported unless you commit some sort of violent, heinous crime. Then you have something to worry about. But
Ah,
other than that,
Le estoy agradeciendo a Kevin el habernos acompañado esta noche. Le pedí que por último les elimine a todos ustedes la duda de que el gobierno está deportando a personas que tienen su residencia permanente o algo al contrario. Todas las personas que están legal, el gobierno no está haciendo nada al respecto. El proceso que tenemos desde que esté todo funcionando todo te permite quedarte de manera permanente y ojalá te vuelvas en un momento oportuno enfermero. I'm displaying our information, but anyone who wants to have a consultation with Kevin, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will make arrangements for you to have Kevin usually give really excellent consultations. The price is not very high, so it's actually really good. But anybody who needs legal consultation, trust me, you are talking with one of the best immigration lawyers there is in the country. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So we'll make sure. Um, I should have put on the slide your information there too, but I'll make sure that everybody gets it. Okay.
absolutely.
Muchas gracias a todos por habernos acompañado. Cualquier persona que tenga necesidad de una consulta formal migratoria en los Estados Unidos, no duden en contactar a Kevin. Es una de las mejores bufetes de abogados en el área migratoria en los Estados Unidos. Sus costos son bastante módicos, así que no duden en acercarse. Contáctenme o contacten a Carrie. Nosotros hacemos que ustedes se pongan en contacto con Kevin y con su equipo. Thank you again, Kevin. Um, it's a pleasure to have you um, as our partner.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Buenas noches a todos. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a few weeks, in a couple of weeks, in our next seminar. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good
Thank you,
Good night,
Kevin.
everyone.
Thank you, Kevin. Good night, everyone.